Hello, I'm James Sturt-Schmidt, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my routines and strategies for MFL teaching from this academic year. I really like to start each lesson off with a bit of music in the target language, so I have a sort of song of the week, have that playing at the start of the lesson, greet the students at the door in the target language, and then get them to give the books out. I also like to start my lessons as I mean to go on, so by that I mean keeping the pace and keeping expectations high, having a starter activity to get the students engaged and set up for what they're going to be doing, such as an odd one out or a multiple choice, and then showing them the objectives and the progression steps so that they're being involved in their own learning and they know where they're going to be headed. The odd one out activity that I mentioned, in Spanish I call that Busca, intruso, and I really love this activity because it gets students curious about language and really gets them focusing on that attention to detail, like for example how this accent completely changes the meaning of the word como. And I really love as well that quite often there's no right or wrong answer. For example, in this one I said it was bebemos because it's the only plural form of beber, but then students also say it was bebemos because it's the only word with 3 syllables, or that it's bebo because it's the only word with 1 E. So I really love this activity. It's a really sort of fun, can be light-hearted and a really kind of engaging way to start lessons. With Key Stage 3 I tend to use a multiple choice starter like this one. It's quite, it's a low stakes, confidence boosting way to start the lesson and just gets them to recall some of that vocab that you might have been using recently to set them up for the rest of the lesson. I tend to use an objective slide that looks a bit like this with clear objectives and progression steps. I have the date and the title in the target language and then the objectives, and then as a sort of secondary starter I get students to find different bits of vocab from the objectives, which is a good opportunity to work things out from the context, pick up some new vocabulary, and then of course I go through and make sure everyone's understood all of the objectives before we then start the lesson. I try to use lots of visual aids and dual coding to support students' learning. So for example, instead of presenting the future tense endings like this, I'll present them in a highly visual way which helps students understand when to use the singular ones, when to use the plural ones, and also which ones start with an E and an A. And I also try to use phonetic aid memoirs. So for the Spanish word when, for example, here we've got taekwondo, and if we lose the tai, we're left with cuando. I also tried to provide highly visual explanations for grammar, such as by using highly visual presentations like this one, and maybe even sometimes using flowcharts to show students how using certain words might necessitate a slightly different sentence structure than other ones. And I find sometimes it helps to draw comparisons with English, for example, showing them with in Spanish with lo and superlatives, how that sentence would be structured when we translate it to English, and how we then tend to put the word thing in there somewhere. And the same idea goes with word order and getting students to think first of all about how we would translate things literally, and then what's wrong with that and what needs to change. So for example, that comes up a lot with the adjective coming after the noun, but in this context how the article and the noun need to stay together in the Spanish, when in English the noun gets moved to the end. So also color coding things can help students really pick out which is the which word is the article, which is the noun, which is the comparative or the superlative, and which is the adjective. I think that questioning is perhaps one of the most important aspects of teaching, and one questioning strategy that I employ are leveled questions. So I may start off with yes, no, then I'll move on to 2 options, so X or Y, then 3 options, so X, Y or Z, and then finally open-ended questions once students already feel pretty confident and they're really prepped to answer those properly. 2 other questioning strategies that I like to use are the pose, pause, pounce, bounce, which is a really good way to differentiate the pitch of the questions so that you've got lower ability students giving right answers and feeling good about themselves, but then you're able to pitch it slightly higher and then get the deeper kind of why is it right, what's the grammar rule from the higher ability students so that they're stretched and challenged as well. And the other strategy is the think, pair, share, which I really like because it gets students working collaboratively, puts them in that Vygotskian zone of proximal development, and it also then takes the pressure off giving an answer and feeling like if you get it wrong, everyone's going to look at you, because then it's not on you, it's on the group. I like using graded listening exercises that are highly influenced by Gianfranco Conti, so that I'm teaching listening, not just testing listening. So for example, raise your hand every time you hear a certain word or phrase, tally the number of times you hear that phrase, put these words in the order you hear them, and also delayed dictation. And I also like doing the same sort of approach for reading. So while they might have some questions about the reading, so sort of traditional reading comprehension, I then like to do a second activity with the text where they have to find different grammatical aspects, different tenses, different conjugations, different gender adjectives, and things like that. I also like using narrow readings, which again are an idea taken from Gianfranco Conti. According to him, these should contain highly patterned, comprehensible input and recycle a given set of vocabulary over and over again. So he recommends you use between 3 and 6 or maybe even more short texts, which use a very set structure, recycle a lot of the same vocabulary, but have certain differences. And then there are a range of different activities you can get students to do, which require them to read through these texts and to really pay a lot of attention to detail. So they might need to respond to whether statements are true or false. They might need to look for who does certain things, what certain things are done, when or where they happen. And they might need to be able to use superlatives to say the most sporty person is, the least sporty person is, and statements like that. Another idea from Conti are overgeneralizations. So you might give students a list of statements about the text, and they need to pick which of the statements, or maybe just one of the statements, which doesn't apply, which is an overgeneralization. So with these texts, for example, the statement that they are all talking about things they enjoy, that would be an overgeneralization because the third text clearly that's not the case. David says he hates reading magazines. Another idea is to match L1 or L2 statements with the correct text. So depending on students' level, these statements might be in English or they might be in the target language, and they need to match different statements with the different texts. And finally, to find a question out of a list of questions which is non-applicable, which doesn't apply. And again, this can be in the target language, which can be really useful to get students to understand questions in the target language. And mistranslations as well are a really good way to pick up on common errors, address those misconceptions, get students to be reflexive about their mistakes, and hopefully avoid making them, whether it's Spanish to English translations or English to Spanish. So let's take a look at our progression steps. I've explained some of my strategies and routines, so let's tick that one off. And my next step is to say thank you very much for watching.